The sun was just beginning to rise over the mountains, casting a soft golden glow over the small village nestled in the valley below. Birds chirped in the trees and the cool morning air carried the scent of pine and damp earth. A group of children had already set out for their morning adventure, as they often did. They loved exploring the edge of the forest and the winding trails that led up into the hills. Today there was a sense of excitement in the air, a promise of something new waiting to be discovered. Sophie, a bright and fearless girl of 9, led the group. She had a curiosity that often got her into trouble, but it also brought the children to places they had never seen before. Her younger brother Liam trailed behind her, clutching a small stick as if it were a sword. The other children, Anna, Leo, and little Ben, followed closely, laughing and chattering about the adventures they had imagined the night before. As they wandered further than usual, the forest grew thicker and the path became harder to follow. The sunlight filtered through the tall trees, creating patterns on the ground. The children paused for a moment, catching their breath and listening to the sounds around them. It was quiet except for the rustling of leaves and the distant call of a hawk. But then, something unusual caught Sophie's eye. Off to the side of the trail near a fallen log sat a man. At first, she thought he might be a hiker resting, but as she looked closer, she realized something was different. His clothes were worn and patched, and his hair was long and tangled. His face was covered in dirt, and there was a look of exhaustion in his eyes. He wasn't just resting, he seemed lost, confused, almost fragile. Sophie's heart skipped a beat. "Guys, look over there," she whispered, pointing toward the man. The other children turned and gasped. Anna covered her mouth in surprise, while Leo and Ben exchanged nervous glances. Liam, though younger, sensed the gravity of the moment and held tightly to Sophie's hand. They had heard stories of people getting lost in the mountains, and the thought that someone could be out here alone was frightening. Sophie took a cautious step forward. "Hello?" she called softly, trying not to scare him. The man lifted his head slowly, his eyes meeting hers. There was a flicker of relief in his gaze, as if he had been waiting for someone to notice him. He didn't speak at first, only nodded slightly and gestured weakly toward the forest. The children hesitated, unsure what to do. Sophie could see that he was shivering. Even though the morning was warm enough, she felt a rush of compassion. "We should get help," she said firmly. "He looks like he really needs it." The children nodded in agreement, though their steps were heavy with worry. They ran back down the trail as fast as they could, calling for their parents along the way. Sophie's mother, a kind and caring woman, was the first to arrive at the scene, followed closely by a few neighbors who had heard the children's frantic calls. When they reached the man, he was still sitting on the log, looking exhausted and bewildered. The villagers took one look at him and quickly wrapped him in blankets, offering warm food and water. He accepted everything quietly, his eyes scanning the faces around him with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "Who is he?" little Ben asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," Sophie's mother replied, "but he looks like he's been alone for a long time." The man finally spoke, his voice rough and low from disuse. "Thank you for helping me," he said. Each word seemed to cost him effort, but there was a sincerity in his tone that made everyone pause. He looked at the children and gave them a small, tired smile. I didn't know if I'd find anyone." The villagers were careful and gentle, asking him questions about where he had come from and how long he had been in the mountains. He hesitated at first, only giving small pieces of information. It was clear that he was cautious, used to living alone and wary of strangers. But as the children sat close by, holding his hands and offering comforting smiles, he began to relax. There was something in their innocence and kindness that reached him in a way words could not. Sophie knelt beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "Are you hungry?" she asked softly. "We brought you some bread and cheese." The man nodded, his eyes glistening slightly as he accepted the food. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, and the children watched him closely, fascinated by the way he seemed to notice even the smallest details around him. The way the sunlight hit the leaves, the sound of a bird in the distance, the warmth of a blanket on his shoulders. For the first time in years, the man felt a strange sense of belonging. It was not just the food or the shelter. It was the attention, the care, the fact that someone, even these little children, had noticed him and chosen to help. He had spent so long alone in the mountains, surviving day by day, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. As the morning turned to midday, The villagers worked together to make the man comfortable. They offered him clean clothes, a warm bath, and a place to rest. The children stayed close, asking questions and listening eagerly to his quiet responses. His voice was soft but steady, carrying a calm wisdom that intrigued them. They wanted to know everything about him, where he had lived, how he had survived, what he had seen in the mountains. Each story he shared made their eyes widen with wonder and curiosity. Henry, as he introduced himself, was careful not to reveal too much about his past. There was a sadness in his eyes that spoke of loss and pain, and the villagers respected his privacy. Yet, the children's presence seemed to lift some of the weight from his shoulders. He found himself laughing at their jokes, offering little bits of advice, and even showing them how to identify certain plants and tracks in the forest. It was a small connection, but it was enough to begin breaking the walls he had built around himself. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the villagers had made a temporary space for Henry in one of the guest rooms of Sophie's house. He was hesitant at first, unsure about sleeping indoors after so many years outside, but the children's gentle encouragement helped him relax. Sophie and Liam stayed nearby, reading stories and sharing small gifts they had brought from home. There was a warmth in the room, a sense of safety and care that Henry had not felt in a long time. As he drifted off to sleep that night, he thought about the children who had found him, who had insisted on helping him when no one else would. He felt a strange mix of gratitude and hope. For the first time in a long while, he wondered if perhaps life had more to offer than isolation and survival. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a place for him here, with people who cared, and children who had seen him not as a stranger, but as someone worthy of compassion. The children, too, fell asleep with their own thoughts. They had always imagined adventures in the forest, but they had never imagined that one day they would discover someone like Henry. Someone mysterious, strong, and kind all at once. They didn't fully understand why, but they felt a deep connection to him, as if their meeting had been meant to happen. Outside, the mountains stood silent, their peaks glowing in the last light of the day. A gentle wind rustled through the trees, carrying the promise of new beginnings. For Henry, the lost man of the mountains, and for the children who had rescued him, life was about to change in ways none of them could have imagined. The first step of their journey together had been taken, and though none of them knew it yet, this chance encounter would shape their lives forever. The mountains, which had once been a place of solitude and survival for Henry, would soon witness the growth of a new family, a bond forged by kindness, courage, and the unexpected magic of connection. And so in the quiet of that small village, surrounded by the love and curiosity of children, the lost man found the first glimpse of hope he had felt in years. Little did they all know, this was only the beginning of a story that would forever intertwine their lives, hearts, and futures. The morning sun poured through the small windows of the guest room, casting warm light across the wooden floor. Henry stirred slowly, feeling the softness of the bed beneath him, a comfort he had not known for years. The sounds of the village were already alive outside, roosters crowing, children laughing, and the faint hum of people starting their day. For a moment, he just lay there, letting himself feel the simple comfort of being indoors, of being safe, of being noticed. Sophie and Liam were the first to rush into the room, bouncing with excitement. "Good morning, Henry," Sophie said, her eyes sparkling. "Did you sleep okay?" Henry managed a small smile. "I slept well," he said softly. His voice still had a rough edge, but there was warmth in it now. He sat up slowly, feeling the stiffness in his muscles. The children watched him carefully, not wanting to startle him. "We brought you some breakfast," Liam said proudly, holding a plate with bread, cheese, and fresh fruit. "Mom said you need to eat well today." Henry accepted the food with gratitude, noticing the care that had gone into preparing it. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, and felt a strange sense of belonging. It was a simple act, but it spoke volumes. Someone cared enough to think about him, to make sure he was comfortable. After breakfast, the children were eager to show him around the village. They wanted to share their world with him, to help him feel like he belonged. As they walked, Henry noticed how different life was here compared to the mountains. People greeted each other warmly on the streets. The smell of baking bread and fresh flowers filled the air. Children played freely in the open spaces, laughing and running without a care. It was a world full of life, connection, and energy. a world Henry had mostly avoided for years. The children led him to the village square, pointing out the little shops, the bakery, the blacksmith, and even the small school. Henry listened quietly, absorbing everything around him. He had spent so much of his life alone, relying only on himself. Now he realized there was a whole community out there. People who could offer kindness and support. People who could become a part of his life if he allowed it. As they wandered through the village, the children asked him questions about his life in the mountains. Henry answered carefully, not wanting to share too much too soon. I had lived alone, he said, in the hills. It was quiet. It was safe, but also lonely. The children listened intently, fascinated by the stories of survival he told. They asked about how he found food, how he stayed warm, and what animals he had encountered. Henry smiled faintly, realizing how much they genuinely wanted to understand him. For the first time in a long time, he felt seen. Not as a stranger, but as someone interesting and valuable. Sophie noticed a small bird perched on a nearby fence. Henry, look. Do you think you could show us how to make a trap for birds? She asked innocently. Henry shook his head with a soft laugh. I won't show you how to trap them, but I can teach you how to watch them, how to understand them, and how to know which plants and berries are safe to eat. The children followed him eagerly as he pointed out various plants, explaining which ones were edible, which ones could heal a small cut, and which ones were best avoided. He even showed them how to track animals, teaching them to notice footprints, broken branches, and other subtle signs in the forest. The children's eyes lit up with wonder, and Henry felt a quiet pride at their eagerness to learn. By midday, Henry realized how much the children had grown on him. Their trust, their curiosity, and their laughter were like a balm to his weary heart. He had spent so many years avoiding connections, fearing pain and disappointment, yet here were these little humans giving him something he had almost forgotten: hope. The children's parents watched from a distance, noticing the bond forming. Sophie's mother approached Henry cautiously. We're glad you're safe here, she said gently. We didn't know what to expect when you arrived, but seeing how you connect with the children, it's something special. Henry looked at her, the corners of his eyes crinkling slightly. I don't know what to say, he admitted. I haven't felt this welcomed in a long time. Throughout the day, Henry continued to explore the village with the children. They showed him their favorite spots, including a small creek where they liked to catch tadpoles, a hidden grove of wildflowers, and an old tree with a carved bench beneath it. Henry found himself laughing more freely than he had in years, his rough exterior softening with each passing moment. As the sun began to lower in the sky, the children invited Henry to join them in a game they had invented, a mix of hide-and-seek and tag. At first he hesitated, unsure if he still remembered how to play like a child. But when Sophie grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the starting line, he found himself smiling and running, feeling the rush of movement and laughter fill him with a sense of freedom he had almost forgotten. After the game, the children collapsed on the grass, panting and giggling. Henry sat beside them, his back against the warm earth. For a moment, they were all silent, just breathing in the air and enjoying the moment. Henry looked at their bright, curious faces and felt a deep, unexplainable connection. Sophie spoke first. Henry, do you think you could stay a little longer with us? She asked. Her voice was hopeful, almost shy. Henry hesitated. The thought of leaving the mountains, of becoming part of a family, was both terrifying and strangely comforting. He looked at the children, their eyes full of trust and innocence, and realized that he wanted to be here, not just for a day, but for more. I think I could, he said softly. Over the next few days, Henry settled into the rhythm of village life. He helped the children with small tasks like gathering firewood and carrying water, and in return they showed him the simple joys of living among people who cared. They played games, explored the nearby fields, and spent quiet evenings by the fire, listening to Henry's stories about the mountains. Each night he fell asleep with a sense of peace he had not known in years. The villagers began to notice how Henry's presence affected the children. They were happier, more confident, and more curious about the world around them. Henry, too, changed subtly. His posture, once tense and guarded, became more relaxed. His eyes, once wary and distant, now held warmth and focus. He laughed more freely, offered help without hesitation, and even began to form friendships with a few of the villagers. One afternoon, Sophie asked Henry if he would teach them how to build a small shelter in the woods, just like the ones he had used in the mountains. Henry agreed, and the children followed him eagerly into the forest. They learned how to weave branches and leaves together, how to make a small fire safely, and how to protect themselves from sudden changes in the weather. Henry's patient guidance and gentle encouragement made the children feel capable and empowered. As they worked, Henry shared more of his thoughts. Being alone in the mountains, it teaches you a lot, he said quietly. But it also teaches you what's missing when there's no one to share it with. You never realize how much you need people until you've been without them. The children listened in silence, sensing the weight behind his words. They didn't fully understand what he meant, but they felt the honesty and vulnerability in his voice. Sophie reached out and held his hand, a simple gesture that spoke louder than any words. By the time evening fell, the shelter was complete. The children cheered, proud of their accomplishment, and Henry felt a quiet pride as well. It was more than just building a structure. It was building trust, connection, and the beginnings of a family-like bond. That night, as they sat around a small fire in the shelter, Henry told them stories of the mountains, the wild animals, the changing seasons, and the quiet beauty of solitude. But he also talked about the lessons he had learned, the importance of kindness, the value of trust, and the joy that comes from caring for others. The children listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder, and Henry realized that he was no longer just teaching them, he was learning from them too. In the safety of the village, surrounded by children who had rescued him and shown him unexpected kindness, Henry began to imagine a life that was different from anything he had known. A life that included friendship, trust, laughter, and maybe even love. It was a life he had once thought was impossible for him, but now seemed within reach, and though he didn't say it aloud yet, a small, fragile hope began to grow in his heart. A hope that he might not just be a visitor in this world, but a part of it, connected to others in a way that he had thought long lost. The day ended with the children asleep around him, tired but happy, and Henry sitting quietly by the fire, feeling the warmth on his face. The mountains he had called home for so long still held a place in his heart, but for the first time he realized that home could mean something more. Home could mean people. Home could mean family. And in that moment, with the stars beginning to twinkle above the village, Henry allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had found both. The following morning, Henry awoke to the soft light filtering through the window and the sound of birds singing outside. The village was waking up slowly, and the air was crisp with the freshness of a new day. He stretched and felt a surprising sense of energy. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the heaviness of solitude pressing on him. He had something to look forward to, another day with the children, and a chance to step further into this new world that had begun to feel like home. As he dressed in the clean clothes the villagers had provided, he could hear laughter outside. Sophie, Liam, and the others were already up, running across the courtyard, their voices ringing with joy. Henry smiled softly. Their energy was infectious, a bright spark that made the cold edges of his old life seem far away. He made his way outside, careful not to trip over the uneven stones in the yard. "Good morning, Henry," Sophie called, waving excitedly. "We were hoping you'd come with us today." Henry chuckled. "Where are we going?" he asked, curious but cautious. "We want to show you something," Liam exclaimed. "It's a secret spot we found near the creek." The children led Henry through familiar streets, their excitement growing with each step. They passed small shops and waving neighbors, and Henry began to notice how people in the village were starting to look at him differently. There was no fear or suspicion in their eyes anymore, just curiosity and a growing respect. He realized that even though he was new to their world, they were beginning to accept him. When they reached the edge of the creek, the children paused. The water sparkled in the sunlight, and the trees reflected perfectly in its calm surface. It was a peaceful, almost magical place. The children laughed as they dipped their hands in the water and skipped stones across the surface. Henry watched them, a warmth spreading in his chest. There was a simplicity here he had long forgotten, the joy of small, unhurried moments, the pleasure of companionship without expectation. Sophie turned to him with a smile. "We wanted you to see this because it's our favorite place. We come here when we need to think or just to feel happy." Henry knelt by the water, letting his fingers brush the cool surface. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "I never realized there was a place like this so close to the village." As the morning wore on, Henry showed the children how to identify tracks in the mud along the creek's edge. He explained which animals had passed through recently and how to tell the difference between a bird's footprint and a small fox's. The children listened intently, their eyes wide with curiosity and excitement. Henry's stories and lessons were no longer just about survival. They were about observation, patience, and understanding the world in ways the children had never imagined. By midday, they had gathered some wild berries and edible plants. Henry taught them how to prepare a small snack safely. The children's hands were clumsy but eager, and Henry's gentle guidance made them feel capable. They laughed at their mistakes, spilled berries, and joked with one another. Henry felt a surge of happiness he hadn't realized he had missed. It wasn't just about teaching them. It was about sharing a part of himself and seeing it reflected in their wonder. Later, as they sat under the shade of a large oak tree, Henry noticed something he hadn't expected. The children were beginning to see him as more than a visitor. They were starting to look at him like family. Sophie leaned against his shoulder, and Liam rested his head on his arm. There was trust in their small gestures, an unspoken acknowledgement that Henry was no longer just a stranger. They felt safe with him, and he felt responsible for their well-being. Henry's heart tightened. He had spent so long avoiding attachments, believing that caring for others would only bring pain. Yet here, in the simplest of ways, the children had begun to teach him something he had almost forgotten. That it was possible to care deeply without fear, that love could be gentle, patient, and forgiving. The day continued with more exploration. Henry led the children to a small hill where the view of the valley stretched out endlessly. They could see the village, the distant mountains, and the winding river glinting in the sunlight. The children gasped in awe, and Henry felt a quiet satisfaction. For all the years he had spent alone, he had never experienced this, the joy of sharing a moment of wonder with others. As the sun began to lower, the group made their way back to the village. Henry walked quietly beside the children, listening to their chatter and laughter. He noticed the glances from the villagers, some curious, some approving. It struck him that slowly, imperceptibly, he was becoming part of this community. They were not just welcoming him, they were trusting him, and in doing so, giving him a chance to trust them in return. That evening, after a simple meal with the children and their mother, Henry found himself sitting quietly by the fire. The children were finishing their chores and talking about the day, their voices full of energy and excitement. Henry felt a sense of peace settle over him, a calm he hadn't known in years. He realized that the village, the children, and the warmth they offered were slowly building a home around him. Not just a place to live, but a place to belong. As night fell, Henry reflected on the days he had spent with the children. Each moment, each small act of kindness had chipped away at the walls he had built around himself. He had come from a life of solitude, where the mountains had been both his refuge and his prison. Now he was beginning to see a new path, one filled with connection, laughter, and the gentle responsibility of caring for others. The children, meanwhile, could hardly sleep. They whispered excitedly about their plans for the next day, exploring a hidden grove, finding more berries, and teaching Henry how to climb the tallest tree in the village safely. They felt a sense of pride and ownership over the time they spent with him. This was more than a game or an adventure. It was a bond forming, a sense that they were helping someone in need and discovering a friend, even a family figure, in the process. Henry lay awake for a while, listening to the quiet night sounds. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a life beyond survival, beyond solitude. He thought about mornings like this one, days spent exploring and teaching, evenings by the fire with laughter and warmth surrounding him. He felt a budding hope that maybe he could stay here, not as a guest or a stranger, but as someone who mattered, a person who was needed, who could give love and receive it in return. Over the next few days, Henry began to take small steps toward integrating more fully into village life. He helped the children's mother with household tasks, assisted neighbors with repairs, and even shared some of his knowledge about the mountains in practical ways. how to find clean water, how to predict sudden changes in weather, and how to move quietly and safely through the forest. Each day he felt more capable, more connected, and more at peace. The children's affection for him grew with each passing day. They followed him everywhere, eager to learn and to share their world with him. They told him their hopes and dreams, their small worries and triumphs, and Henry listened with patience and genuine interest. He realized that in caring for them, he was learning to care for himself again, to trust, to hope, and to open his heart. One afternoon, while helping the children gather firewood, Henry noticed how they supported one another. If one of them stumbled, the others would reach out, laugh gently, and help them up. The scene reminded him of a family he had once known long ago, one that had been taken from him by circumstances he had never fully recovered from. A quiet ache filled his chest, but it was accompanied by gratitude. Perhaps it wasn't too late to experience something similar again, to be part of a family, even if it wasn't the one he had lost. As the day drew to a close, the children invited Henry to join them in preparing a small garden plot behind their house. They planted seeds together, laughing as dirt fell on their hands and clothes. Henry guided them gently, showing them how to space the seeds, water them carefully, and tend to the young plants. The act of nurturing life was simple, yet profound. In it, he saw a reflection of the care he could offer the children, the village, and perhaps himself. That night, as the children fell asleep, Henry remained awake a little longer. He stared out the window at the darkened village, the stars beginning to twinkle in the clear sky above. The mountains loomed in the distance, familiar yet distant, a reminder of the life he had left behind. Yet here, in this quiet village, he had discovered something he had thought lost forever: connection, purpose, and the gentle promise of love. For the first time, Henry allowed himself to feel that he could belong somewhere, not just in a place, but in the hearts of the people who had welcomed him. He thought of the children who had found him, nurtured him, and slowly opened the door to a life beyond isolation. A life where he could matter, where he could protect, teach, and love. And though he didn't yet know how, he felt certain that this was only the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where the lost mountain man was no longer just a wanderer, but someone who was becoming part of a family, slowly but surely. The days passed slowly but filled with warmth and laughter. Henry had settled more comfortably into the rhythm of village life, and the children were becoming more confident in his presence. They no longer hesitated to approach him with questions, ideas, or simple stories about their day. Henry listened to every word, learning more about the lives of children who had grown up surrounded by a community, something he had missed for years. One morning, Henry and the children decided to explore a part of the forest they had not yet visited. The trail was steep and the ground was uneven, but Henry walked carefully, ensuring the children were safe. He noticed their eyes lighting up as they discovered small wonders: a family of rabbits hiding in the underbrush, a tiny waterfall cascading over rocks, and birds building nests in the branches above. The children squealed with delight, and Henry laughed along with them, feeling a joy that was rare and precious. Sophie paused and looked up at him. "Henry, do you ever get lonely in the mountains?" she asked quietly. Henry hesitated. It was a question he had asked himself countless times over the years, and one he had rarely answered aloud. "Yes," he admitted finally. "Sometimes the mountains are beautiful, but also very quiet. Too quiet. And when it's quiet for too long, you start to think about things you would rather forget." The children didn't fully understand, but they sensed the weight behind his words. Liam squeezed his hand gently, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. The children had already begun to fill a part of Henry's heart he thought had been closed off forever, and their care was becoming more meaningful with each passing day. As they continued through the forest, Henry taught them how to move silently through the trees, how to notice signs of animals, and how to respect the forest as a living, breathing place. The children hung on every word, eager to learn and explore. But more than that, they were learning to trust him, to see him not as a stranger but as someone who could protect them, guide them, and care for them deeply. By the afternoon, They reached a clearing that overlooked the valley. The view took Henry's breath away. The village looked peaceful, the river winding lazily through the fields and the mountains rising majestically in the distance. The children sat on the grass, exhausted but happy, and Henry sat beside them. For a long while, none of them spoke. They just sat, absorbing the beauty and the silence of the moment. Finally, Sophie spoke. "Henry, do you think you could stay here forever?" she asked softly. Henry looked at her, surprised by the question. He thought of the mountains, the life he had known, the years of solitude and fear, and he thought of the children, their laughter, their trust, their innocent belief that he could belong with them. His heart swelled with a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. I would like that," he said quietly. The return to the village was filled with chatter about what they had seen. Henry noticed how the children's faces glowed with excitement, and he realized that these moments were changing them too. They were learning about the world, about trust, and about the quiet power of kindness and care. And Henry, in turn, was learning how to be part of something greater than himself. Back at the village, Henry helped the children's mother with chores, carrying water, repairing fences, and preparing food. His hands were rough and calloused from years of work in the mountains, but they were steady and careful, a comforting presence in the household. The children watched him closely, admiring his patience and skill. It was clear that he was becoming more than a helper. He was becoming a part of their lives in a deep and meaningful way. Over the next few days, Henry continued to bond with the children. He helped them with their lessons, taught them survival skills, and even showed them simple ways to cook over a fire safely. The children, in turn, taught him about the village, its people, traditions, and daily routines. There was a balance forming, a mutual exchange of knowledge and care that made each of them stronger, happier, and more connected. One evening, after a long day of exploration and learning, Henry found himself alone with the children's mother. She smiled warmly at him, noticing the change in his demeanor. "You've done so much for them already," she said softly. "I've never seen them so happy, so confident." Henry looked down, a quiet humility in his eyes. "They've done as much for me," he said. I didn't know I could feel this way again. I didn't think I could ever belong anywhere, but they've shown me it's possible." Her eyes softened and she nodded. "Sometimes the heart finds what it needs in the most unexpected ways," she said. "You've been through a lot, Henry, but it's clear you care for them deeply, and they care for you." Henry felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling of being seen and understood. For years he had believed that love and connection were dangerous, that to care deeply meant to risk pain. But now, surrounded by the children who trusted him in a community that was beginning to accept him, he realized that vulnerability could be a strength. Over the next few weeks, Henry became more integrated into the family. He helped the children with their chores, played games with them, and even shared quiet moments of reflection. He began to anticipate their needs, to notice when they were worried or tired, and to offer comfort without being asked. The children responded with affection and trust, calling him Henry with a fondness that felt like family. One afternoon, as they worked together in the small garden behind the house, Henry noticed how naturally the children looked to him for guidance. They listened carefully to his instructions, asked thoughtful questions, and even argued playfully about the best way to plant seeds. He realized that he was not just teaching them skills. He was shaping their confidence, their ability to trust, and their understanding of care. Sophie looked up at him and smiled. "Henry, you're like a big brother to us," she said shyly. Henry felt a lump in his throat. The words carried a weight he hadn't expected, but they were also comforting. He knelt down to meet her gaze. I want to be more than that," he said softly. "I want to be someone you can always count on, someone who's here for you no matter what." The children's eyes widened and they nodded eagerly. There was a new understanding between them, a recognition that Henry was becoming something more than a friend or helper. He was becoming a part of their lives in a permanent and meaningful way. As the weeks went on, Henry's presence in the village became more natural. The villagers grew accustomed to seeing him with the children, helping with tasks and participating in daily life. He was no longer the mysterious mountain man. He was someone they could rely on, someone who brought knowledge, skill, and quiet kindness to their community. The children's mother noticed the growing bond between Henry and the children. She saw how they sought his advice, how they laughed with him, and how they trusted him completely. There was a gentle tension in her chest, a feeling she hadn't anticipated, an acknowledgement that Henry was becoming more than a temporary presence in their lives. He was becoming a part of their family. One evening, as the children slept soundly, Henry and the mother sat quietly by the fire. The room was warm, filled with the soft glow of the flames. "Henry," she said gently, "have you thought about what comes next? About staying here permanently?" Henry looked into the fire, his thoughts drifting. He thought of the mountains, the solitude he had once cherished, and the years of wandering. But he also thought of the children, their laughter, their trust, and the way they had opened a door in his heart he thought had been closed forever. I think I want to stay," he said quietly. "I want to be here. I want to be part of their lives. I want to belong." Her eyes softened and she reached out to touch his hand. "They already see you as family," she said. "And I think we do too." Henry felt a warmth spread through him, a sense of peace and hope he hadn't known in years. The fear that had kept him isolated, the worry that connection would only lead to pain, began to fade. He realized that he could love, care, and be part of a family without losing himself. And so, as the fire crackled and the night deepened, Henry allowed himself to imagine a future he had never dared to dream of. A life filled with laughter, trust, and the quiet joys of family. He thought of the children who had rescued him, who had shown him kindness, and who were slowly teaching him the true meaning of love and belonging. For the first time in years, Henry felt that he was not lost. He was home. The mornings in the village had grown bright and full of life. Henry now moved with a quiet confidence, a man who had learned to live not just in the world but with the world around him. The children were up before the sun, as always, ready for a new day of learning, exploring, and laughing. Henry had become their guide, their protector, and increasingly someone they could rely on in ways that went far beyond a temporary friendship. That day, Sophie and Liam ran to his room with excitement. "Henry, come on! We have something to show you," Sophie called, her eyes sparkling. Henry smiled and followed them, feeling a warmth in his chest that had been absent for years. They led him to the edge of the forest where the morning mist still clung to the trees. There, a small wooden swing had been tied to a sturdy branch by the children themselves. "We made this for you," Liam said proudly, "so you can rest when we play and we can all have fun together." Henry felt his throat tighten. It was such a small gesture, yet it carried an enormous weight of thoughtfulness and care. He sank into the swing gently, watching as the children ran around, giggling and shouting in delight. The sound of their laughter filled him with a sense of belonging he had never known. For years he had survived alone, thinking connection was dangerous or unnecessary. But here, in this simple moment, he realized that love and family could be built through small, consistent acts of kindness and trust. The days passed in a rhythm of discovery and joy. Henry took the children on longer excursions into the forest, showing them hidden trails, safe climbing spots, and even how to fish in the nearby stream. They learned to work together, care for the plants and animals around them, and watch for changes in the weather. Henry watched them grow in confidence and skill, their eyes filled with curiosity and trust. And in return, he felt a sense of purpose he had not experienced in years. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Henry noticed how naturally the children gravitated toward him. Sophie was telling him about a secret nook she had found in the woods, and Liam was tugging at his sleeve to ask a question about a strange track in the dirt. The children's mother, observing from a distance, felt a swell of gratitude and admiration. Henry had become more than a helper or a friend. He was a presence that shaped the children's days, giving them confidence, knowledge, and safety. Henry had started to take small steps into the household as well. He helped with chores, prepared meals, and even offered advice on tasks the mother had struggled with for years. His guidance was quiet but steady, always patient, never imposing. Slowly, the household began to feel fuller, warmer, and more complete. The children's mother saw in him a man who was capable not just of surviving, but of loving and nurturing. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, she approached Henry as he sat quietly on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one. "Henry," she said softly, "do you know what you've done for us?" "For me? For them?" Henry looked at her, unsure how to respond. I hope I'm helping," he said quietly. "You're more than helping," she replied. "You've given the children a father figure they never expected. You've given me hope that someone can be here for us, truly here." Henry felt a lump in his throat. The words carried a weight he hadn't anticipated. For years he had feared the vulnerability of caring, the risk of opening his heart. But here, in the quiet of the night, with the mother's eyes reflecting trust and understanding, he realized he had found a place where he could be more than alone. He could be family. Over the next weeks, Henry's bond with the children deepened in ways that were both subtle and profound. He became their anchor, someone they sought for guidance, comfort, and even small adventures. They looked up to him with admiration, and he felt a quiet pride in being part of their growth. He laughed with them, scolded them gently when necessary, and offered encouragement in all things, big or small. One rainy afternoon, as the drops fell softly against the roof, the children gathered around Henry in the living room. They were building a small fort with blankets and cushions, chattering excitedly. Henry watched them, heart full. Their laughter, their imaginative play, and their trust in him reminded him of a life he had long thought lost. For the first time in years, he realized that home wasn't a place in the mountains. It was these people, this family, this bond of care and connection. Henry began to take on responsibilities he had never imagined he would embrace. He helped with lessons, ensuring the children understood their schoolwork, but also encouraged them to ask questions, think critically, and explore their creativity. He showed them practical skills like tending the garden, preparing simple meals, and recognizing changes in the weather. The children thrived under his gentle guidance, and Henry thrived in return, finding fulfillment in being a constant, reliable presence in their lives. The mother noticed the transformation in Henry as well. The once quiet, guarded man had become patient, kind, and thoughtful. His presence was no longer just a temporary comfort. It was a stable, nurturing influence. She began to feel a warmth toward him that went beyond gratitude, a deep respect and admiration that quietly shifted into the beginnings of affection. One evening, as the children slept, the mother approached Henry. "You've changed all of us," she said softly. "The children, me?" "Even the village. You've brought something here that we didn't know we were missing." Henry looked down, humility in his expression. "I didn't expect to find this," he admitted. "I thought I was meant to be alone forever. But these children, they showed me something I had forgotten, that life can be shared, that care can be returned, that love can exist without fear." Her eyes softened and she smiled. "And I think it's time we let that love grow." Over the next few months, Henry became fully integrated into the household. He celebrated birthdays with the children, helped them through minor injuries and illnesses, and became a steady presence in their lives. The bond he shared with them was no longer just a teacher or protector. It was the bond of a father. He guided them through challenges, encouraged their dreams, and became the person they could rely on for support, comfort, and love. Henry's role in the village also grew. Neighbors began to see him not as the mysterious mountain man who had wandered into their lives, but as a capable, caring man who contributed quietly but meaningfully to the community. His knowledge of the forests, the mountains, and practical survival skills became a valuable resource. Yet it was his warmth, patience, and reliability that made him truly respected and cherished. One summer evening, as the family sat together in the garden, Henry noticed how the children leaned into him naturally, seeking reassurance or guidance. He realized that the bond he shared with them had grown into something profound and permanent. They weren't just children he had rescued. They were children who had rescued him in their own way, opening his heart to love, trust, and the joys of family life. Henry took a deep breath, feeling the weight and the gift of responsibility. He had once believed that attachment would only bring pain, that caring deeply was dangerous. Now, surrounded by the laughter of children and the quiet warmth of their mother, he understood that love was not a weakness. It was the greatest strength a person could have. It was what gave life meaning. He knelt down beside the children who were tending small plants in the garden and ruffled Sophie's hair gently. "You know," he said softly, "I'm proud of all of you. You've taught me more than you'll ever know." Sophie looked up at him, her eyes wide and bright. "We love you, Henry," she said simply. Henry felt a lump in his throat, his eyes moist. "I love you too," he whispered. "All of you. And I promise I'll always be here for you." That night, as he watched the children sleep peacefully, Henry allowed himself to dream. He thought of the mountains he had once called home, and of the life of solitude he had known. But he also thought of this home, this family, and the love he had found. He realized that life was no longer about surviving alone. It was about living fully, being present and giving and receiving love. The next morning, the village awoke to the sound of Henry teaching the children a new game, their laughter ringing through the streets. Neighbors passed by, smiling at the sight. They could see the change in him, the joy in the children and the warmth in their little home. Henry had become more than a resident or a visitor. He was a father, a mentor, and a beloved part of their lives. In the weeks and months that followed, Henry's connection with the children grew deeper. They shared secrets, solved problems together, and faced small challenges hand in hand. He guided them gently, always patient, always kind, and always present. In turn, they trusted him implicitly, looking to him not just for knowledge but for comfort, guidance, and love. And slowly, quietly, Henry realized something he had never thought possible. He had found a family. A family that chose him, loved him, and needed him as much as he needed them. A family that would walk with him through every season of life, offering laughter, trust, and unwavering support. The lost mountain man had become a father. He had found home, belonging, and love. And in that small village, surrounded by children who had rescued him and a mother who had trusted him, Henry finally knew what it meant to be part of something greater than himself, a life filled with connection, care, and the quiet, enduring joy of family. The village had settled into a gentle rhythm, with Henry fully a part of it now. Days were filled with work, laughter, and shared meals, while evenings brought quiet reflection and the warmth of a home filled with love. Henry had found a life he had never imagined, a life not of solitude in the mountains but of connection, trust, and belonging. The children had grown more confident, more joyful, and more curious under his guidance, and Henry had grown alongside them, learning to care, to laugh, and to open his heart fully. One morning, the children ran to him with excitement, their faces glowing. "Henry, come quickly. We found something." Henry followed them eagerly, curious about what they had discovered. They led him to the edge of the forest where a small clearing opened up. In the center was a young deer, tangled in some fallen branches. Its eyes were wide with fear and it struggled to free itself. The children froze, unsure how to help. Henry knelt beside the deer, speaking softly. "It's okay. We'll help you." His hands were gentle but firm as he carefully untangled the branches. The deer flinched at first but calmed as Henry continued to speak in a soft, reassuring voice. Within minutes, the deer was free and bounded away into the forest, leaving the children and Henry smiling in relief. "That was amazing," Sophie exclaimed. "You saved it!" Henry shook his head with a small smile. "We all helped. You were brave too." The children's faces lit up with pride, and Henry realized how these small moments shared together were teaching them courage, patience, and kindness. It was the same lesson he had learned long ago in solitude, but now it was shared, multiplied by love and care. As the days passed, Henry continued to guide the children in all aspects of life. They explored the forest, built small shelters, learned to fish and forage, and even discovered ways to make simple tools. Every moment was an opportunity to teach, to protect, and to connect. And every moment strengthened the bond between Henry and the children, weaving trust and love into the fabric of their lives. One afternoon, while Henry and the children were gathering firewood, a sudden storm rolled in. Dark clouds covered the sky and the wind whipped through the trees. The children froze, unsure where to go. Henry took their hands firmly. "Follow me. Stay close," he instructed, leading them to a small cave he had noticed earlier during a walk. Inside, they were safe from the rain and the wind, huddled together. The storm raged outside, but inside the cave there was warmth and safety. Henry shared a story about the mountains during a storm, how he had learned to stay calm, to observe the signs, and to protect himself. The children listened, wide-eyed, absorbing every word. And as they listened, Henry felt a quiet pride. They were learning not just skills, but resilience, courage, and the importance of caring for one another. When the storm passed, the sky cleared, revealing a brilliant rainbow stretching across the valley. The children cheered and Henry smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. It was moments like this that reminded him of the beauty of shared experiences, of living life with others rather than in isolation.